Acho que o pessoal da internet, não explica. Mas só lembrando que nós temos agora no próximo final de semana, dia 23, 24 e 25, the reflective meetings with the projeto Spiritist, and it's going to be happening not in the FSS but the St. Andrews community. So everybody is more than welcome to subscribe. www.fsscalgary.ca spiritizar.html. See you all there.
Welcome everybody. Glad to see you all here today. And we'll start with a text from Living Spring. And it's text number 4 actually. And the title is Each One. And it starts with a passage from Paul in 1 Corinthians 12:4. Now, there's a diversity of gifts, but the Spirit is the same. And Emmanuel starts saying that in every place and situation, each one of us can display divine qualities for the edification of all those who are part of our lives. Learning and teaching are ongoing tasks in which we take part in increasing the common treasure of wisdom and love. To those who administer, can express fairness and magnanimity more often. Those who obey can have more ample resources for demonstrating a job well done. The wealthy, better than anyone else, can do more work and share its blessings. The poor have more latitude to cultivate the wealth of hope and dignity. The strong can more easily be benevolent at any time. The weak can be humble on any occasion without embarrassment. The learned can help everybody with their expansive knowledge, hence renewing the general thought for the good. Learners, with their many opportunities, can always distribute their wealth of goodwill. The healthy can practice charity far and wide. The sick can more convincingly teach lessons of patience all around. Thus, the gifts may be different. Intelligence may be characterized by various levels. Worthiness displays various qualities, and ability is the result of effort. But the divine Spirit that sustains everyone is substantially the same. All of us can accomplish much more in our particular station in life. Take a good look at your position and attend to the imperatives of the infinite good. Place above your own and the divine will make use of it. So let us close our eyes and start our initial prayer. By closing our eyes, we're focusing on ourselves today. We'll be able to take some time out of our day to reflect on Jesus' teachings, but bringing those teachings into our own lives. We're taking an hour or 2 hours of our time to work on our own, to work on ourselves. And that is the basis of self-love. And now we thank our Father and Jesus for giving us the opportunity to work on ourselves, to give us the opportunity of developing our self-love, our self-respect. And I'd like to ask them that we're able to get unbiasedly to our inner being, to our own self, so that those reflections can touch our immortal spirit. So be it. Thank you, everybody. There's more people now after the prayer. It's like a miracle.
It's the magic of Sunday.
Yeah, I know.
Right? You close your eyes, there's a few people. When you open, there's a whole lot more.
I'm glad to see more people here then. And our talk today is based on the Spiritist conscience. And the reflection is towards have I been applying Jesus' teachings in our own lives. And it's a small little prelude to what's happening during the next weekend here. Not here at FSS, but with Elidio from Brazil, who's coming to have the seminar here from Friday to Sunday. And we'll touch on a parable that he'll be talking about throughout the entire weekend. So it's a big summary, if you will. I'll touch on a few points, but he'll actually be able to go very deep, and you'll have 3 days to do it. So hopefully this just plants a little seed, so you can go and enjoy and
Just a taste.
just a small little taste, exactly. So it's no surprise that it's based on Spiritist consciousness, which is one of the video lectures from Elidio. And after, I have some passages from the Gospel of Matthew and John, and a passage from the book, The Gospel According to Spiritism, that are there. So we'd like to start with an initial reflection, as we always do. And the first one is, oh yeah, and by the way, if you want to, there will be a few reflections throughout the presentation, so if you want to close your eyes and reflect, I won't be offended, that's okay. Sometimes I do that myself. So if you want to sleep, I'll think that you're reflecting, so it's okay. It doesn't matter to me, so you can do, basically feel free to do that. And so the first question is, what does Spiritism mean to me? What does Spiritism mean to me? The second one is, do I feel myself as an immortal spirit? Do I understand what an immortal spirit is, and do I feel myself as an immortal spirit? And the last one is, am I bringing the law of love, justice, and charity into my life? Do I know what it means? And if I do know what it means, am I actually bringing it to my life? Am I actually living it, exercising it? So, since the first question was about Spiritism, we will do a couple reflections on Spiritism itself. And just to start, I'll give you a little taste on what the difference is between the doctrine and the movement, because we do use them interchangeably sometimes. So the doctrine, the Spiritist doctrine, that's what Kardec wrote through spirits, right? So that's the truth that we try to follow, that we try to live by. And it's not changeable, right? It's here, and this is what we should learn. Whereas the movement is what we do about it. The movement, the Spiritist movement, is comprised of us, all Spiritists, ourselves, our Spiritist communities, our Spiritist centers, right? And it's based on the behavior of each individual Spiritist. And the goal, or one of the goals of the Projeto Spiritizar, which is what's happening next weekend, is to bring the Spiritist movement closer and closer to the doctrine, right? Try to make sure that we're living by what the doctrine says. And with that in mind, we can talk about the purpose of Spiritism. So the main purpose of Spiritism is to relive the gospel of Jesus as done back in 2,000 years ago, as the apostles lived the gospel, right? To bring us back to that, to those times. And as a consequence, we will be working towards our own selves, our immortal spirits. Right? We'll be learning more about ourselves, and from that, improving ourselves to be better Spiritists by utilizing the gospel of Jesus, the books from Kardec, as well as other Spiritist books that we have from a few mediums such as Givaldo Pereira Franco or Francisco Xavier. So that's usually the main purpose of Spiritism. And we always say that Spiritism is also a science, right? And what does that mean? So the science, when you think about a science, it's the study of something in depth, right? You think about something and you go very deep to try and understand what it is. So the science behind Spiritism is trying to understand, trying to study the immortal spirit, right? And what's amazing about this is that it's not a science that focuses on one specific thing, but it's actually an applied science, because we're constantly learning more about ourselves. We're constantly learning more about the immortal spirit. So it's not something isolated, but something applied that looks at our feelings, that looks at our, what's the word that he used here? It's the science that studies our feelings, it studies our own development of our virtues, and it's happening here, and it's happening now. And we all do it. Right? You don't have to be a scientist to do it. You can only be a Spiritist willing to learn about yourself and to improve yourself. And the last one is the legacy of Spiritism. So we're saying that we're now living in the era of the moral phenomena. So back in the day when Spiritism started, 160, 170 years ago, it first started with all the physical phenomena. It first started with the banging walls, the banging table, turning tables, and all those physical phenomena. From then we moved on to writing, so psychography, by utilizing writing from mediums under the influence of spirits to write as instructions, to write as messages. Right? So that characterized Spiritism as the era of the intellectual phase, right? Where we're getting all the information, all the instructions. And it proved that man can speak beyond the body, it can talk and can think beyond the grave. Right? We're not just here right now as people, but the spirit lives after death. So the legacy at that time was the information, was the intellectual. Now we're moving on to the moral phase, where the legacy a few years from now will be our own moral development. We will be the legacy of this era. Our own moral development will be that legacy. And it's something really exciting to think about, because it's us. It's now on us to develop ourselves, to use everything from the intellectual era, to use everything that's been taught to us, to actually apply in our lives and develop and improve ourselves that way. And so that's the legacy that Afro talked about in this talk. And so that leads us, since we talked about mortal spirit, right, a very, very quick definition of the mortal spirit is the spirit that knows and understands that all the vicissitudes, or all the challenges that we go through life, all the pain, or all the disappointments that we go through life, they accept it as a learning opportunity, as an opportunity to learn. They don't complain about it, instead they accept and learn from it. And those are usually what Alito calls the circumstantial actions. So the circumstantial actions are the things that you go through life. Right? It could be the work that you do here at the Spiritist Center, it could be what you do at your house, it could be the work that you do at your job. And those are what he calls transitory and transferable. So those come and go, We have those experiences often. They start and they finish, and they're transferable. Somebody else can do it for us. For example, me talking here today, on Monday there'll be somebody else talking. At work, there's always somebody else that can do what you do. So all these circumstances, all these actions, they're transferable. Somebody else can do them for us. The interesting one are the existential actions. So these are the teachings, or these are, our decisions that we make throughout our lives to improve our own immortal spirit, which is trying to understand how can we bring the circumstantial actions to become existential. So as I talked about, we always have the circumstantial actions throughout our lives, but how do we bring them to become an existential action so we can evolve our immortal spirits from their circumstantial actions? And it's really important to understand that the existential actions, they're individual and untransferable. They're not transitory. They don't come and go. Because as we're learning, as we're evolving ourselves, we're building. It's like building blocks. You're constantly improving, right? And that happens to yourself. And it's untransferable because nobody else can do it for you. Nobody else can improve. I can't ask my mom to make me a better person, right? I have to make me a better person, right? So I can't. It's untransferable. And is that me?
What is that question?
And this is something that we always, this is a sentence that people usually use, which is the means to an end. So the means are the circumstantial actions, and the end is the existential. The end is that goal that we have. So how do we make sure that we're using our everyday actions, our everyday experiences to evolve our own moral growth? And that's when we're just going to start discussing the law of love, justice, and charity. Are we, first of all, do we understand what those are? And if we understand, are we taking every opportunity that we have in our lives? Are we applying those to ensure that we're learning and evolving through every single opportunity that we go through? So the entire presentation will be on those three, talking about love, justice, and charity. Love will be a quick slide because I've done 3 presentations past talking about self-love, so describing love. This will be a quick one. Then the charity will be based on the gospel according to Spiritism, and justice will be on a parable that we'll look into. So love, like is described in Matthew 22. This is a very short version. Love God and your neighbor as yourself. So he always talks about loving God with all our heart, with all our mind, and with all our soul, and your neighbor as yourself, right? So it's funny to see that yourself is at the very end, but that's the key for us to love God and to love our neighbor. Loving myself comes first because we can't give something that we don't have. And we always talk about this. I can't love somebody if I don't love myself. So loving myself comes first. So how do we do that? How do we love ourselves? Well, loving ourselves is simply making the decision to improve our moral spirit. Taking the time to improve ourselves, which is something that we could be doing right here, right now. Right? If we're reflecting from Jesus' teachings to make ourselves a better person, that is loving ourselves. Right? So, describe loving ourselves. Then how do we love God? Well, God, He doesn't need our love. God is God. He doesn't need us to love Him so He can feel better. So loving God means loving the divine laws. And it's amazing how those connect, because loving myself is working towards our moral development. But how do we do that? We do that by following the divine laws. Following the divine laws is loving God. Right? So those two combine very, very seamlessly. And once we're developing ourselves through the divine laws, we automatically or invariably will love our neighbor. There's no way that we're developing our virtues, we're becoming closer and closer to God and not love our neighbors. So that will be a consequence, will be a result of improving ourselves. So this is what, in a nutshell, very simply, what the love in that law means. Then we go into charity. Charity, I'm going to resort to the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is one of the books from Kardec. And this is chapter 17, and the name of the passage is The Good Person. And just to give a little bit of context, charity, there is a question in the Spirit's books, question 886, I believe, where Kardec asks, what's the true meaning of the word charity as meant by Jesus? What did Jesus mean by charity? And the answer is a sentence. It's quite simple. And it talks about benevolence towards others, indulgence towards all the shortcomings, and forgiveness to everybody. So we'll talk about a little bit about benevolence and indulgence. So this text from the Gospel that refers to benevolence, it goes like this. The good person encounters satisfaction in the benefits they are able to spread, in the service they're able to render, in the happiness they promote, in the tears they're able to dry, and in the consolation they offer to those who are afflicted. Right? So it pleases them to do something for other people. Right? And right next to that, it comes, their first impulse is always to think of others before themselves, and to look after others' interests before looking after their own. On the other hand, the selfish person always calculates the benefits and the losses arising from any generous action. So, this one, in these first two sentences, we need to reflect a little bit about it. Because when we read it the first time, when you don't reflect it, the thought is that we should just completely forget about ourselves and do everything for others, right? And that has happened quite often. We see people do that quite often. So the intent is forget about myself. I don't matter. I'm just going to do things for others, right? But this is a big misinterpretation, because that way we're leaving us behind. But that's not the intent that Kardec is trying to do here. Focusing on others without focusing on ourselves actually can become escape. It's something very easy to do. Because our purpose, like we talked about here before, is to improve our own self. By forgetting about ourselves and working on others, we're not fulfilling our own purpose, which is the one that requires a lot of work. Right? Progressing and improving ourselves, that's what takes time. Right? And that's what brings happiness, because we're fulfilling our own purpose. If we're only worrying about others and pretending to do charity by worrying about others, we won't be working on our own selves. And you can see that in books from Spiritist books, from Francisco Xavier, for example. I don't know the translation of Livre Volte, but it's the Spirit talking about how he lived his entire life for others, and then when he goes to the spirit world, he realizes that he didn't waste, but he should have worked on himself first. Because by working on yourself first, you can perform the true charity, which is helping others by first helping yourself. It goes back to what we talked about love. Like, I can't love myself without loving others. I can be charitable to others if I'm not being charitable to myself. I can't give what I don't have. Right? So it's a big misinterpretation. And the detachment that Kardec is talking about here, like, which could be interpreted as forgetting about yourself, this detachment of yourself. It's the detachment he's referring to here is to our own ego. Like, it's to forget our own ego and work on ourselves first. And what he talks about here, it's not by running away from ourselves and occupying us with other people's lives, right? It's detaching our ego and working on ourselves, realizing that we're not perfect, and working on ourselves, and from then going into helping others. So it's just a big reflection on what are we doing with the work or the charitable work that we're doing, right? Are we helping ourselves first, or are we just occupying our lives with charitable work so we don't have time to work on ourselves, right? So that's the reflection that Lydia brought up with this passage. And the next one talks about indulgence, which won't take as long as the other one. But the good person is indulgent with the weaknesses of others, because they know that they also need indulgence, remembering that Christ said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Right? So it's really important here to understand again that we have to be indulgent towards others, but also recognizing that we need indulgence ourselves. Right? So being indulgent with ourselves first, and then indulgence to others. Always go back to ourselves. And it keeps going, they do not take pleasure in looking for defects in others, nor in calling attention to them. And if necessity obliges them to do so, they always try to look for good qualities so as to lessen the bad ones. Right, so this is how are we looking at others' defects. Right? Can we maybe try and lessen them by looking at the good instead of the bad? And the reflection here is, when we come to this Spiritist Center, we encounter people that are like-minded, so sometimes it might be easier to feel that indulgence towards our brothers here. So the reflection is, am I bringing the indulgence to my house? Am I bringing the indulgence to my work? Am I being indulgent to those people? Or when I see my wife and when I see my husband, all I can think about is the defects. Right? Do I take time to actually look at the things that they have already improved on, the things that they are good? Right? So bringing that into our lives, not only at the Spiritist Center, right? It's not like come into that door and then I'm an indulgent person. It's about being an indulgent person every time, bringing that into our lives and living it. So that was the reflection about indulgence. And now, almost halfway, we'll start on the parable. Then we'll talk about justice and charity. And we usually use symbolism to try and understand the parables. And because it's through symbolism, through the symbols that we can extract from the parables from Jesus, that we're not only able to understand, but also to feel. Right? Symbolism ignites in us this idea of not only trying to understand, but also to feel it. Right? Because it's not just an interpretation of what's written, but you have to take that beyond and realize what the symbols are and how that can impact and change. How does that apply to my own life? And that's why the Gospel of Jesus was written many, many years ago, and we're still studying and finding new symbolisms, finding new purposes and new interpretations to it, because we're able to use the beauty of symbolism to extract different nuances and different learnings from it. And the parable we'll be working with is called The Workers in the Vineyard, which again will be the parable used by Lydia next weekend. I invite you all to go. I won't be there, but I definitely invite you all to go. And it goes like this. I'll first read the entire parable, and then we'll look into the symbolism. So it starts with, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard." So the landowner, he owns a vineyard, and he goes out in the morning to the marketplace, to the town, to find people to work for him, to need workers to work on the vineyard, to collect grapes or something. And he agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and send them into his vineyard. So denarius was the currency of the time, the money. And he agreed, the landowner agreed to pay the workers 1 denarius for the entire day of work. And then he went later on at 9 in the morning, he went out again and saw other people were standing around not doing anything in the town. So he saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. So he told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay whatever is right. Right, so he went back, offered them the job, and the workers accepted and went to work on the vineyard. Then he went out again at noon, about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. So he went out to the marketplace quite a few times to find workers to work on his vineyard. And about 5 in the afternoon, so almost when the day was over, an hour before the day was over, he went out and found still people in the marketplace standing around. And then he asked them, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? And the worker said, because no one has hired us. So the landowner said to them, you also go and work in my vineyard. It's 5 o'clock, there's only 1 hour left in the day to work, but still, there's still enough time, you can go. And then when the evening came, the owner called his foreman and said, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. Right, so that time, the landowner said, job's done at 6 o'clock, let's everybody gather around, and then I'll pay you what you deserve. And the workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So they had worked for only 1 hour and received a denarius. So those who were hired first, back at, I believe it was 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, thank you, 12 hours before, they expected to receive more, right? Because if somebody worked for 1 hour, received 1 denarius, well, if I worked 12 hours, you're going to make more than 1, right? And but each one of them also received 1 denarius. So whoever worked for 1 hour, whoever worked for 12, received the same thing. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. They start to complain to the landowner, well, how is this fair, right? Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day for 12 full hours. But he answered, one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for 1 denarius? So when they first hired them 12 hours ago, they agreed 1 denarius for a full day of work. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be the first, and the first will be the last. So the symbolism that we'll use here is very, it's not about the macro, it's about the micro. So it's how every, I won't go into every sentence of the parable, but it's how every sentence applies to our own life, not between the macro, which talks about myself with others. And so this is focusing on our own self, where the kingdom of heaven, the landowner, and the vineyard can be explained as the vineyard is the immortal spirit. It's the place that we go to work. We're here to work on ourselves, on our immortal spirit. So this is where we go to work. The landowner is God. The landowner is the God, and the kingdom of heaven is our active work. That is the work of us, this making the decision to work on ourselves and actually going and doing it. That is the kingdom of heaven. So then he agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and send them into his vineyard. So what is the denarius here? We talked about denarius being the currency, right? And how much it's the money of the time. But because God is giving this denarius, we say that the denarius here is the happiness that we receive through work. Because at the end of the day, once you've worked, you receive that denarius. Since God is giving that to you, in this interpretation, the denarius is happiness. But which work? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. It's the work that fulfills our own self. This is the work that we do on our own self. Again. Yes, please come.
So, what is this happiness? No, it's okay. Question, sorry. What is this happiness? It's our mission. Our mission, as it states in the question 115, is to be happy. But not the happiness, that the euphoria that we live in the matter, but the real happiness.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And the other thing is, he said a denarius, right? So why only one denarius? Why isn't he giving two? Well, because you can't give two happinesses. Happiness is only one. There's not one, there's not two, there's not different types. Happiness is happiness. What does change about happiness is how long it lasts in our lives. So, am I feeling happy for a minute? And then as I start developing myself more, that happiness starts to extend and grow and grow and grow up to the point where we reach eternal happiness, which is what Eric talked about it being our purpose. Once we reach eternal happiness, that means that our happiness is now the feeling that prevails over any other. It's still the same happiness, but now we've evolved enough to feel it all the time. So that's why there's only one. There's only one type of happiness. And once he keeps going, he talks about, I will pay you whatever is right. This is to the workers that came midday. And what does that mean, whatever is right? Whatever is just, right? Which would be the one denarius. And this is exactly what Eric talked about. Our happiness is our right. We have the right to be happy, but it's also our duty. Right? So they're both. So we have the right to receive the happiness, so we will receive a denarius. But it's also our duty. Right? And that brings the question, how are we working? Right? Are we working towards our own happiness? Or are we working to show other people that we're doing well? Right? Are we working towards ourselves, or are we working for others? And the other symbolism that he brought here is when they're really complaining about the fact that they only got one denarius, when he said, and you have made them equal to us. So the people who worked 1 hour are now equal to the people who worked for 12, right? And they were mad about it. Why? And here comes the comparison. Instead of focusing on the denarius they got, they're worried about what others are doing. They're not focusing on them. They're worrying about others. And this is what Jesus told Peter in John 21st. When Peter was, when Jesus said that somebody was going to betray him, one of the apostles was going to betray him, and Peter asked Jesus, but who is it going to be? Tell me, who is it going to be? And Jesus said, what is that to you? Follow me. Why does it matter to you who will betray me? You, your only job is to follow me. Follow my teachings. Improve. Exactly. No, don't worry about that. We'll work on yourself, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, looking at others instead of our own self. I'm going a little too fast. And then once the people got their denarius, their justification was that you made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work. And here it's really the reflection is on the work. So the workers, they said that they felt the burden of the work. The work was a burden for them. It wasn't something pleasurable. It was a burden. So the good work, the work on ourselves, is not a burden. It's not supposed to be a burden. Exactly. If we're truly working on ourselves, if we're fulfilling our existential purpose, it's not a burden. If it is a burden, that's a great measure, a great indication. If a work feels like a burden, it should be reflected whether or not we're doing it the right way. Right? And here we can see that they weren't, because they're feeling it as a burden. Please.
Yeah, just to go back to what you said in the beginning. It's if it feels like a burden, are we just looking at the circumstantial Because if we are applying the essential to the circumstance, it shouldn't feel like a burden. Because we know why we're doing what we're doing, or how we know why we're doing it the way we're doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, it might not necessarily change our jobs, change our church. You're not going to change anything.
Scratch our life, start again.
No. It's just repurposing. It's transferring those circumstantial actions into existential by simply understanding where they're coming from, why I'm going through this, and what I'm going to do to come out of this a better person. Right? It's not going to change the action itself, but how we approach the action. Oh, and sorry, there was one more thing here. It was how they were talking about another indication of the burden is that they were working for a reward. Right? They only worked to get that denarius. So they were playing what we call the bargain with God. They were bargaining with God. If I do something, I'll get something in return. So that means that they're not working on themselves. Because if I'm working on myself, it's not like I'm going to get something in return. It's an evolutionary journey. You're not getting anything back. You're constantly improving. Whereas they were playing the bargain game. I'll give you something, I'll get something back. It was an exchange. Right? They had to give something to get something back. And that's not what the work on ourselves means. So again, when we're truly working on ourselves, we're not expecting anything back.
And it's also the duty you were talking about, right?
Yep.
It's the concept of doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and not for a reward. Because if we are doing it the right way, the reward will come naturally.
Exactly. Yeah. We won't feel as a burden. We'll be happy to work on ourselves. So we won't need anything in return because we're already feeling good. Right? It's automatic. Right? Finished a little early, actually. So the last, I got 3 slides more. This one is take your pay and go. So this was God telling the worker after he gave him the denarius and the worker was complaining. God said, take your pay and go, right? Which might sound rude, but we should understand what that means. So first of all, go where? And the reflection here is go inside. Go inside yourself. Reflect about what you got, what you've done. So when he said take your pay, take your denarius, but also take all your, what's the word he uses here? Take all your values, take all your beliefs, being good or bad, take everything and go inside. And reflect about what you did. Reflect why do you feel that it's unfair? Right? Why can't you accept the denarius that I gave you? Why do you have to be looking at others instead of yourself? So take your pay and go. Now go and reflect. Which Joanna de Angelis, before I talk about this, Joanna de Angelis always talks about the existential emptiness that we have in ourselves, right? And that comes from not going inside, not understanding our true purpose, like Eric said, about seeking the eternal happiness through the work on ourselves. So we focus so much on the outside when truly the happiness is within. Right? Happiness is not conditional to anything that we have. Right? Happiness will come as our journey in evolving our immortal spirit. And I really like how by taking your pain and go, that brings you back to working on yourself. And if we go back to the very first passage on the parable, it talks about how the kingdom of heaven is the work that we do in ourselves, right? Because the vineyard is the immortal spirit. The workers are us working on our own self. So the kingdom of heaven is us working on our own self. So the kingdom of heaven is not up there. It's not to the side, it's not down. It can be right here, right now. As long as I'm truly working on the immortal spirit, on my vineyard. That's what the kingdom of heaven is comprised of. So we can have it right here, right now. And the last reflection that I want to bring was, but he answered to one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius?" So that was an agreement that they had. If the contract that they did was between me and myself, at the very beginning, he said, "I will pay you 1 denarius to work for a full day," and they agreed upon it. Right? So this was already agreed upon. There's no point in complaining. And the complaint is between me and myself. Right? This is the reflection that we were talking about. And here, so if the worker keeps complaining about others, which is something that really touched me, if the worker keeps complaining about others, he won't be able to enjoy his own denarius, even if he already has it. So God gave him the happiness, but he couldn't even take it. He couldn't enjoy his happiness because he was worried about others. Right? This is a beautiful explanation to how Joanna Genesis talks about us having all the seeds to our virtues. Right? We have all the virtues in ourselves, yet we can't feel them because we're worried about how others are doing, or how do they feel, or why do they get more than I do. Right? When we have all the virtues in ourselves already, right? God has given them to us, but instead of realizing that we have them and enjoying them, we're just disconnected and worrying about what's happening to others. So, and because we're always complaining, we can't see it. Right? Like I said before, He's giving us the happiness, but we complain so much that it's like the window is muddy. You can't see it. The happiness is right there waiting for you and giving it. But we decide to complain and complain and complain, and we can't feel it. So the last thing that I want to bring about is, do you think that the workers, so if they had accepted their denarius, if they had forgotten about the others, they accepted the denarius, they felt the happiness, do you think they would worry about the others? Do you think they would be worried about how others worked less and still got the happiness? No. Right? And that is the true charity that we were talking about first. If I'm allowing myself to feel the happiness, to worry about myself and feel the happiness, then I will want others to feel happy. If I have the happiness in myself, I can give it to others. If I don't, then I can't. Right? So, when we stop complaining about others, when we stop looking at others are doing and focusing on us, accept that happiness, we will invariably want to help others, right? Which will be the true charity, fulfilling our own existential purpose and also helping the world to become a better place by helping others. So I hope that has, I hope I was able to pass on to you guys what I felt when I read this, and how to me it was an eye-opener to realize that we have it as seeds in our hearts. Are we just letting the complaining and the worrying about others get in the way? So it certainly was really touchful for me, which is why I decided to do this presentation and end with the happiness part, with the thought that we have it. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to see it and enjoy it. Right? So I think I finished a little early.
Still have around 9 minutes.
9 minutes? Oh, I should get my glasses.
Can I add something?
Yes, please. So questions, everybody. Eric and Renata can answer.
Go.
I think maybe it helps us to understand the concept of, if we're happy, it's natural we want to see someone else happy. If we try to imagine that happiness is sort of filling ourselves, as if we were a vessel and we're getting filled, at some point, it spills. You want to share.
That's true.
Plus, if you think about it, if you are the only truly happy person and you look around and everybody around you is miserable, it just doesn't feel right. You want everybody to feel as good as you feel. So if it's possible, you will definitely help everybody around you to feel as good as you feel.
Yeah, you want to share that good feeling.
Even if we think about the law of affinity, right?
Yes.
So I want to be around. If I am happy, if I feel fulfilled, I want to be around other people who feel the same way. And if you think about family, work, Spiritist center, whatever place it is, we have a group that we usually relate to. So if I am feeling amazing, I want everybody around me to feel amazing too. In my family, at my workplace, at the Spiritist center, childhood friends, whoever it may be, new friends that I make, I want everybody to be there.
Yeah.
And if I can do something to help, why wouldn't I?
Exactly. And it's also nice to understand that we don't have to find eternal happiness for us to start helping others. Right? It's not like we have to become Christ before we can help others. The minute we make the decision to work on ourselves, to love ourselves, that will already start to make us feel better, and we'll feel the urge to help others. So we don't have to complete the scale of our evolution to start helping others. But we have to start with ourselves first.
I just wanted to share the way that I see the concept of happiness, like inner happiness. I think it depends about how we see or how each human being sees, right? Because to me or to all of us, being here is a time of happiness. To somebody else, our neighbor, to be in a bar with his friends, that's his happiness. But we can't convince our neighbor what is a good happiness. Because my perception is this. The same as the joy, the satisfaction to do something good for others. It's our mission, but I see this as my mission. But somebody else may not see this as a mission. Helping others, they live for here and now. And I know I have had the opportunity to know some people that consider themselves as pagans or atheists. So it's just here and now, and I don't care about futures because there is nothing. So who am I to convince them about my points of view, right? So it's hard to live in a circle where the beliefs are different. Right?
You cannot convince them, but you can. But if you have a gratitude with the things you have, you can give the examples. That's the only thing you can do. You cannot convince others for sure.
It's the same, like a personal example. My son, my older son, when I talk, I try to, as a mother, make him. He's just a regular teenager, I would say, a little bit rebel sometimes. I try to show him my perceptions of what is right and wrong, or teach him. And then he says, it may be right for you, but it's not for me.
He's just not there yet.
I'm trying.
Yeah, that's exactly what Carol said. It's the example that we can give. Okay? If we're doing it so others get better, I think we're also not doing it the right way. We're doing that to improve ourselves without expecting anything in return. And once we don't expect anything in return, people, or my experience at least, they start coming to you and like, what are you doing? Why do you feel that way? Why are you not getting stressed out? What are you doing? What can I do? Give me the book. Give me the guidelines they've been doing. Right? So the example will start to radiate out, and like you said, the vessel, the happiness will start to spill. But I do understand that as a mother, it's a little it's a little different, something I can't speak to, but
Yeah, not only that, like true essential happiness doesn't change. What changes is people's perception of what it is. We have a tendency to confuse passions
Like
and enthusiasm for something as happiness, right? If it's that fleeting moment that, you know, for example, some people who are addicted to travel. So they're happy while they're planning and while they're at the place. The moment they go back home, they get sad, they're depressed. So the only way they can find to be happy again is to start planning the next. And it's always about the next, and it's always about the next. So it's an individual exercise. It's for each person to choose, you know, take their payment and go out and go inside and reflect. Is that really happiness, or is that just a passion? Because it's different. And like Carol or Carol said, it's not something we can force on others.
No,
we can only change ourselves.
it's part of
And
the
maybe,
evolution.
and maybe through our example, it might inspire them. We can pray for them. There are other things we can do if they allow us to do. However, we can only change ourselves. It essentially comes down to that.
yeah.
And one of the things that is, I think, connected to that is us trying to control our anxiety. Because you as a mother, I believe that a lot of anxiety
if they
happens.
only could see better, right?
Right,
You
but
don't
it is,
understand that controlling anxiety, that's exposing the anxiety, it's different.
Yeah.
So working the anxiety is developing the virtue, not even exposing it even more, right?
yeah, it's a better word to describe it.
And maybe you are the worker who come at 6 a.m. and the clock is working, and 1 hour to the end he will come. You don't know, so keep living your life.
Yeah. But,
You got our time.
oh, well, thank you for fulfilling that.
Well, and then next week we're gonna see this into a lot
yeah.
more depth, so everybody is invited.
It,
So on a Sunday it's gonna be here. So
No.
Sunday we won't have anything here.
No, because we will be at the community center.
We're gonna post on the
Yeah,
If
we're gonna have to.
yeah, highly recommend. Highly recommend. Renata and I went to Brazil and had something very similar on this festival, and it was
Yeah.
quite touching. So, yes, and if you can't attend it, you can always
You can-
watch it
You
later.
can follow online.
Right? Don't feel like you're being left out. You can always watch later and talk
Yeah.
to the people who actually attended, so we can exchange information. So, thank you. And do the kids have anything?
They're exceptionally quiet.
Yeah, I know.
Guys, just one reminder, since we have a few minutes, we're going to start reading Nosso Lar, or Austro City in English, for our next book club, right, Faye?
Yep.
It's going to happen on September 21st. So we have the book at the library and also in the bookstore.
Yeah, we have in Portuguese and in English in the library and in store.
Here comes the game.
Here comes the gang.
It was.
The snail game.
There you go. It was quiet. Now we're.
Oh, and by the way, next week for the seminar, we will have the kids' education. So any parents who want to attend, we will be able to take our kids in. If you have like any kind of child care problem, we have it covered.
Oh, nice.
And what time is it?
Friday.
Friday, on Sunday.
On Sunday, 9, right? Eric? Sunday is 9 to 1, right? Yes.
Gigi. Eva.
Eso no entendiste. Es que no estoy viendo aquí. ¿Cómo usar el cómo lo aplica? Eso es el simbolismo del barrio.
They're exercising their patience.
Porque el secretario de la niñera,
You guys can
él
come
le
in.
pagó lo mismo, no encontraron carta.
So,
Y lo que yo le decía,
are you waiting for some?
I'm just waiting for you.
No, come in. And we are waiting for you.
Ese
You
secretario
inside,
¿te acuerdas?
you are being patient now.
Sí, pero entonces, ¿por qué no está cumpliendo? Porque hay una parte que era como limpia.
Come on, David. Sophie, come on.
Come on.
Oh, right, that looks good.
Whoa.
Man.